No risk, no gain. Jake and Mike lived in a small town where opportunities were scarce and hopes were often postponed for someday. They spent their mornings doing temporary labor on construction sites, lifting bricks, carrying lumber, and hoping someone would call again the next day. Their afternoons were quiet, almost empty, filled with the heavy silence of financial worry. Their evenings? A little conversation, a little frustration, and a lot of wondering how to fix their lives. Both men were recently married and both wanted a better future. Both had good hearts. Both dreamed of something more. And yet, this is where the story takes its very first turning point. One cool evening, while sitting on the tailgate of an old pickup truck, Jake felt a spark, one of those rare, bright flashes of thought that suddenly changes the direction of life. He turned to Mike and said slowly, almost carefully, "Mike, what if we buy dairy cows?" Mike looked at him surprised. "Cows? Like actual cows?" Jake nodded. "Yes, think about it. People in town love buying fresh milk. It's natural, it's local, and it's always in demand. If we each buy a cow, we can start selling milk. Later the cows will have calves. We'll have more cows, more milk, more income. And someday," Jake's eyes lit up, "someday we could build one of the biggest local dairy businesses in Kansas." It was a dream born from nothing, yet it breathed hope into both men. For the first time in a long time, Mike's eyes glimmered too. The idea was simple, the idea was powerful, the idea felt possible. And so the two friends walked home that night with excitement in their step. They were ready to share this big plan with their wives because they knew change begins with belief, and belief begins at home. Jake's house was filled with warmth and quiet support. His wife listened carefully, then did something extraordinary. She removed her wedding necklace, one of her few valuable possessions, and placed it gently in Jake's palm. "I believe in you," she whispered. "Sell this if you need to. Buy the cow. Build our future. We'll get everything back later. Better, bigger, brighter." Those words did more than encourage Jake. They strengthened him. They gave him permission to dream. But just a few streets away, a very different scene unfolded in Mike's house. Mike's wife listened to the same idea, but her reaction was very different. Her eyebrows drew together. Her voice tightened with fear. "Mike, we have almost nothing, only a few pieces of jewelry. If we sell them and buy a cow, and what if the cow gets sick? What if it dies? What then? We'll lose everything, everything." And in that moment a seed was planted, not a seed of hope, but the seed of fear. Fear is powerful. Fear is convincing. Fear always sounds logical, even when it isn't. By the next morning, the two friends met again. Jake's mind was full of possibilities. Mike's mind was full of disasters. Mike stood there scratching his head nervously. "Jake, what if the cow dies?" Jake laughed softly, not mockingly, lovingly. "Mike, why would you think the cow is going to die? Why imagine the worst before we even start?" But Mike didn't smile. His worry grew deeper. "Maybe it won't die. Maybe it will be fine. But, what if? What if it does die? What then?" Jake had no answer for that, not because the question was brilliant, but because the question itself was the problem. There is no answer for a fear that hasn't happened. There is no solution for a disaster that exists only in imagination. There is no progress in a mind that constantly pulls itself backward. Jake looked at his friend with sadness. If fear is a prison, then Mike was building the bars with his own hands. In life, every dream asks one simple question. Will you move forward or will you stay where it's safe? And this right here is where the two friends' lives split into two different roads. Jake chose courage, Mike chose comfort. Jake chose possibility, Mike chose safety. Jake chose to build a future, Mike chose to protect the present. Two men, two choices, two destinies. What happens next will reveal one of the greatest lessons about success, fear, and opportunity. This is segment 1 of this 7-part journey. A story for dreamers, a story for learners, a story for anyone who wants to understand what separates those who move ahead from those who never begin. Segment 2. The weight of fear and the price of courage. The next morning broke quietly over the Kansas plains. Soft sunlight spilled over the rooftops, the fields shimmered with dew, and the little town awakened with its usual slow rhythm. But inside Jake and Mike, two very different storms were forming. Jake woke up with a decision made. He felt a new kind of energy, something bright, bold, and unstoppable. It was the feeling that comes when a person finally decides to change their life. Not tomorrow, not someday, but today. Mike, on the other hand, woke up with a shadow sitting on his chest. It was the same shadow that visits so many people, the fear of losing what little they have. Seem replayed his wife's words over and over again. What if the cow dies? What if we lose everything? What if this is a mistake? Fear is strange. It doesn't need proof. It doesn't need logic. It only needs a little space. And once it gets inside, it expands like smoke filling a room. Mike got dressed slowly as if his clothes were weighed down with worry. Jake, in contrast, walked out of his house with determination, every step steady and full of purpose. The two friends met near the same old pickup truck as they always did, but this time Jake's eyes were bright with certainty and Mike's were clouded with doubt. Jake smiled. Mike, I'm buying the cow today. Mike's shoulders sank. You're really doing it? Just like that? Yes, Jake said. I've thought about it all night. It's a risk, sure, but so is staying stuck where we are. I'd rather take a chance and fail than never take a chance at all. Mike swallowed. But what if... His voice trembled on the same old question. What if the cow dies, Jake? Jake gently placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. Mike, if you live your whole life asking, what if, you'll never move, you'll never start, you'll never build, the fear will eat your dreams before they even get to breathe. Mike looked away. The truth hurt him because deep down he knew Jake was right. But knowing something and acting on it are two completely different things. Jake continued softly. Look, fear isn't your enemy. Staying stuck because of fear, that's the enemy. Every successful person you've ever heard of took a risk. They didn't know what the future would bring. They didn't have guarantees. They simply believed it was worth trying. Mike heard the words, but fear still wrapped itself tightly around his decisions. Finally, he let out a defeated sigh. Jake, I can't do it. Not now. Not like this. And just like that, the two paths separated. Jake walked toward his new future. Mike walked back toward his familiar past. Jake sleep. Later that afternoon, Jake drove to a local farm a few miles outside town. The gravel road crunched under his tires, and the American countryside stretched endlessly in every direction. The farm owner, an old, warm-hearted man named Mr. Rivers, greeted Jake with a firm handshake. "So you're starting small, huh?" Mr. Rivers said with a grin. "That's how every big farmer starts, one cow at a time." Jake nodded with pride. "Yes, sir, one cow and a big dream." Mr. Rivers showed him several cows, but one particular Holstein caught Jake's attention. She had calm eyes, a strong body, and something about her just felt right. "This one," Jake said, "I'll take her." It wasn't just a purchase, it was a promise to himself, to his wife, and to the life he wanted to build. Jake paid. Every dollar he had scraped together. He even used the money from the necklace his wife gave him. It was everything he owned, invested in one living creature. Did it scare him? Of course. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear. With the cow loaded onto the trailer, Jake drove home slowly, carefully, his heart racing with excitement and nervousness. Mike's returning doubt. Meanwhile, Mike was back at the construction site, lifting wooden beams and hammering nails under the hot Kansas sun. But his mind wasn't on his work. It was on Jake. Every time he hammered a nail, he thought, "Is Jake doing the right thing?" Every time he lifted a board, he wondered, "What if Jake really succeeds?" Every time he wiped sweat off his forehead, another thought crept in. Why didn't I have the courage to try? Fear wasn't just stopping him from taking action. It was stealing his peace, stealing his confidence, stealing the version of himself he wished he could be. By evening, Mike walked toward Jake's place. As he approached, he saw Jake unloading the cow from the trailer. Jake looked exhausted but proud, like someone who had just taken the first real step toward a long-awaited dream. Mike stood there silently for a moment. "You really did it," he whispered. Jake smiled. "Yes, I did." Mike wished he could feel the same pride, the same hope, the same excitement, but instead he felt the same fear rise again. What if she gets sick, Jake? What if she doesn't give enough milk? What if something goes wrong? Jake looked at him, not with anger, but with deep compassion. Mike, things can go wrong in anything: jobs, health, money, relationships, life itself. You can't stop living just because something might happen. Mike listened, but inside his mind kept repeating the same echo. What if? What if? What if? Fear had become his only language. The first step. As the sun set behind the Kansas fields, Jake tied the cow in a small barn he had prepared. He fed her hay, filled a bucket with water, cleaned the stall, and checked on her several times. It wasn't easy, it wasn't glamorous, it wasn't quick, but it was a beginning, and beginnings matter more than perfection. Jake's wife stood beside him, smiling proudly as he worked. "I believe in you," she told him again. "Keep going, one day at a time." Her voice sealed his determination. That night, Jake wrote in a small notebook, "Today I took my first step, and that's enough for now." Meanwhile, Mike lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if fear had cost him the biggest opportunity of his life. This ends segment 2. Ready for more? Segment 3. Struggle, sweat, and the first drops of success. Morning came early for Jake, much earlier than any construction job ever required. The sky was still a deep shade of indigo, and the town was wrapped in silence. Even the wind moved gently, as if careful not to disturb the sleeping world. But Jake was already awake, already moving, already stepping into a new chapter of his life. He walked into the small barn, still half asleep, but the moment he saw the cow, his cow, standing patiently, blinking in the dim light, he felt something shift inside him. Responsibility, purpose, ownership. This wasn't just a cow. This was the beginning of his future. Jake stroked her neck gently. "Morning, girl," he whispered. "Let's get to work." He had never milked a cow before. He had watched videos, taken advice from Mr. Rivers, and observed a few farmers, but doing it himself was a different challenge entirely. He washed his hands, cleaned the bucket, positioned himself carefully, and took a deep breath. "All right, let's try this." The first attempt was awkward. The second attempt wasn't much better. The third, well, the cow moved and almost kicked the bucket over. Jake stumbled back, laughing at himself. Okay, I get it. You're the boss here." But failure didn't discourage him. He kept trying, and slowly, at last, a few drops of milk fell into the metal pail. Plink, plink, plink. Tiny drops, tiny sounds, yet to Jake they were the first notes of hope. After 30 minutes of trial and error, the pail was finally half full. Jake held it up proudly, as if he had just won a trophy. His wife entered the barn with a smile. "How's the first morning going?" Jake lifted the bucket. "This is the taste of our future." The first customers. Later that morning, Jake poured the fresh milk into clean jars, loaded them onto a small crate, and placed the crate in the back of his pickup truck. The sun had just risen, warming the Kansas fields with a soft golden glow. He took a deep breath. "This is it," he told himself. "Time to sell." Driving through the town felt different that day. The streets looked the same, the store signs unchanged, the people familiar. But Jake felt as if he was seeing everything through new eyes. He wasn't just passing through town anymore. He was entering the marketplace. He was becoming a contributor, not just a worker. He was stepping into a role he had never played before. A businessman. Jake stopped at the small farmers' market area where locals sold vegetables, baked goods, and homemade items. He approached a stall owner named Mrs. Thompson, a warm-hearted woman who had been selling fresh produce for nearly 30 years. "Morning, Jake," she greeted kindly. "Heard you got yourself a cow." Jake nodded, suddenly a bit nervous. "Yes, Mom. First day selling milk." "Well now," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Let's have a look." She opened a jar, sniffed the milk, smiled, and nodded. "Looks fresh, tastes clean. I'll take 2 jars." Jake's heart lifted. "Really?" "Yes, really. And I'll tell my customers about you. People love supporting locals. 2 jars sold. Then a passerby bought one. Then another bought 2 more. In less than an hour, Jake had sold every jar he brought. He sat in his truck afterwards, staring at the empty crate, feeling a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "That's it," he whispered to himself. "This can work. This can really work." Meanwhile, Mike watches from afar. While Jake was selling milk, Mike was pushing gravel in a wheelbarrow under the hot sun. His shirt clung to his back with sweat. His hands were blistered. His face was red and exhausted. But none of that bothered him as much as the thought echoing in his mind. Jake is out there doing something, and I'm still here doing the same thing. During his lunch break, Mike sat on a stack of wooden planks, thinking deeply. A co-worker asked him what was on his mind, but he simply shook his head. He wasn't sad for Jake. He wasn't jealous. He was sad for himself. He wanted change. He wanted growth. He wanted a different life. But wanting something is one thing. Choosing it is another. Acting on it is something even greater. The truth gnawed at him. He had let fear control him. After work, Mike decided to visit Jake again, mostly to see if Jake was struggling. Maybe a part of him hoped the new venture was too hard, too messy, too exhausting. Something that would prove he was right to stay safe. But when he arrived, what he saw surprised him. Jake was outside the barn, wiping sweat from his forehead, carrying hay with one hand and holding a milk pail with the other. His shirt was dirty, his face tired, but there was a shine in his eyes, a shine Mike hadn't seen in him before. A shine of purpose, a shine of progress, a shine of pride. "How was the first day?" Mike asked quietly. Jake put down the bucket and smiled. "Sold every jar." Mike felt something twist in his stomach, not jealousy, but regret. "You sold all of them?" he said slowly. "Every single one," Jake replied. "People want fresh milk, and if I keep this up, I can buy another cow soon." Another cow, another step, another risk, and another reward. Mike forced a smile. "Good for you, Jake. Really good for you." But inside a voice whispered, "That could have been us." Early struggles. The next few days weren't easy for Jake. The novelty wore off quickly, replaced by real work. Waking up before sunrise, feeding and washing the cow, milking twice a day, cleaning the stall, sanitizing jars, finding new customers, managing small expenses, dealing with tired muscles, and fighting off constant doubt. Every night he returned home exhausted. Every morning he woke up sore. But every day he made progress. And progress, even the smallest kind, gives strength. Meanwhile, Mike kept watching from a distance. He saw Jake working through rain, through heat, through long days. He saw the exhaustion. He saw the struggles. But he also saw something else. Jake was growing. Jake was learning. Jake was changing. And Mike was staying exactly the same. The turning point one evening. After finishing his work, Jake stood near the barn door and stared at the fields. The sky was painted with shades of orange, purple, and gold. His wife joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You're doing great," she said softly. Jake sighed. "I'm tired, but I'm happy." She smiled. "That's what hard work does. It exhausts the body, but it feeds the soul." Jake looked at his hands, calloused, rough, reddened from labor. Then he looked at the cow peacefully chewing hay. Then he looked at the fading sun. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "I'll do even better." And somewhere behind him, in the quiet distance of the town, Mike stood watching, wishing he had taken the same brave step. This was the beginning of Jake's transformation and the beginning of Mike's realization, but the story was far from over. This ends segment 3. Ready for the next chapter? Segment 4. The seed of growth and the shadow of regret. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of Jake's new life began to take shape. Every morning started before the sun rose, before the birds began to sing, before the town awakened. While most people were still asleep, Jake was already in the barn, carrying out the same set of tasks with steady determination. Clean the stall, feed the cow, check her health, milk her carefully, store the milk safely, prepare jars, plan sales, load the pickup truck, and head into town. Nothing glamorous, nothing fancy, but everything meaningful. With each passing day, Jake became better, faster, and more confident. His hands no longer shook when he milked. The cow responded calmly to his rhythm. His customers began to greet him by name, and the jars of milk he carried in his truck began to disappear faster and faster each morning. Even though the work was physically demanding, Jake felt something he had not felt in years. Momentum. Momentum is a quiet force. You don't see it at first, but you feel it pushing you forward, inch by inch, day by day, transforming effort into progress. And Jake felt it deeply. Mike's growing regret. On the other side of town, Mike continued his daily labor jobs. Some days he worked construction, other days he helped move furniture. Some days there was no work at all, and he spent the afternoon sitting outside his small house, watching cars pass by, feeling the weight of time settling on him. Every evening he would walk by Jake's barn, sometimes intentionally, sometimes pretending it was on the way. But deep inside, the truth was undeniable. He wanted to see what Jake had built. One evening he found Jake scrubbing the barn floor with a brush, sweat dripping down his face. "Still working at this hour?" Mike asked. Jake looked up with a tired smile. "Yeah, every day is long when you start something new." Mike leaned against the barn door. "It looks exhausting." "It is," Jake admitted, "but it's worth it." Mike nodded slowly as if trying to believe him. "People are really buying your milk?" Jake laughed. "Mike, I can barely keep up with demand. Mrs. Thompson says people ask for it before I even get there." Mike forced a laugh in return. "That's good. That's real good." But as he walked back home, he felt a heaviness settle into his chest. "This could have been my story too," he murmured to himself. Regret is a quiet visitor, but once it arrives, it stays longer than fear. And every night it whispered to Mike, "You missed your chance because you were afraid." Jake's first major challenge. But success is never a straight line, and every journey tests the traveler. One cold morning, Jake entered the barn and immediately noticed something was wrong. The cow was restless. Her breathing was heavier than usual. She wasn't eating properly. Her eyes looked dull, and her usual calmness was replaced by agitation. Jake's heart tightened. "This isn't normal," he whispered. Fear tried to sneak in. the same fear that had terrified Mike. But Jake didn't panic. Instead, he did something fear rarely allows. He took action. He called Mr. Rivers, the old farmer who had sold him the cow. "Calm down," the farmer said gently after hearing the symptoms. "It might just be a mild infection. Bring her over. We'll take a look." Jake didn't waste a second. He helped the cow into the trailer, secured her safely, and drove straight to the farm. During the ride, his mind raced with worry. What if she doesn't recover? What if this slows everything down? What if... But then Jake caught himself. He remembered Mike's words. He remembered his own answer to those words. He reminded himself of the truth. Problems aren't signs to stop. They're signs to grow. At the farm, Mr. Rivers examined the cow and smiled reassuringly. "She'll be fine. She's got a mild fever, nothing serious. Give her the medicine I'll give you. Keep her warm, let her rest. She'll bounce back." Jake felt the weight lift from his shoulders. Driving back home, he realized something powerful. He had just faced the very fear that had stopped Mike from ever starting. And he had survived. More than survived, he had learned. Fear versus reality. That evening, when Jake told Mike what had happened, Mike's eyes widened in shock. "Your cow got sick? Jake, that's what I was afraid of. What did you do?" Jake answered calmly, "I handled it." "But weren't you scared?" Mike asked. "Of course I was," Jake said. "But fear didn't help me. Action did." Mike looked down at the ground, feeling a sting in his heart. The difference between them was no longer money or opportunity. It was simply the choice to take the first step and then the next one. Jake continued, "You were right about one thing, Mike. Things can go wrong, but they can also go right, and the only way to find out is to try." Mike swallowed hard. He didn't have a reply, because deep inside he knew Jake had just described the very lesson he had been avoiding. A quiet transformation. Over the following days, Jake cared for the cow tirelessly. He warmed the barn, gave her medicine on time, spoke to her softly, encouragingly, checked her temperature every few hours, made sure she felt safe. And slowly, the cow recovered. Her eyes brightened, her appetite returned, her breathing steadied, and one morning she gave more milk than before. Jake felt overwhelming relief. He rested his forehead gently against the cow's side and whispered, "Thank you. We keep going." Seeing this, Mike finally understood something important. Jake wasn't lucky. Jake was committed. Jake wasn't fearless. Jake acted despite fear, and that difference changed everything. The return of strength. With the cow healthy again, Jake's sales grew even faster. Word spread through town about his fresh milk. People loved the taste, the natural quality, and the trust they had in him. Some mornings, customers waited before Jake even arrived. The jars sold out in minutes. Jake's confidence grew, and so did his dreams. He sat with his wife one evening and said, I think it's time to buy another cow." She smiled. "I was waiting for you to say that." And somewhere outside, Mike walked past Jake's house once again, this time not only with regret, but with a deep, unfamiliar thought. What if I try again? What if it's not too late? What if I take my own step? That small, fragile spark of possibility flickered inside him. It wasn't confidence yet, it wasn't commitment yet, but it was the beginning. And beginnings, no matter how small, always matter. This ends segment 4. Ready for the next chapter? Segment 5. The Second Cow and the Silent Awakening. Spring arrived in Kansas with warm breezes, longer days, and fields turning green with fresh life. The town grew busier, markets became livelier, and people seemed to walk with lighter steps. But no one felt the excitement of spring more deeply than Jake. His dairy business, small but growing, had survived its first challenge. His cow was healthy again. Sales were consistent. Customers trusted him. And each day felt like another brick being laid in the foundation of a future he once only imagined. One evening, after finishing all his chores, Jake stood beside his wife on their small porch. The sky was painted with soft pink clouds fading into blue. "I think it's time," he said quietly. "Time for what?" she asked. Jake's eyes glowed with a mix of excitement and determination. "Time to buy our second cow." His wife smiled widely. "I knew you'd say that. I've been waiting." Jake nodded, confident yet humble. "I'm ready. I know the work it takes. I know the responsibility, and I know I can handle it." His wife took his hand. "I'm proud of you." And with those words, the next step began. The second purchase. A few days later, Jake returned to Mr. Rivers' farm, the place where his journey began. The old farmer met him with a warm grin. "Back so soon?" Mr. Rivers asked. Jake laughed. "I think I'm ready for cow number 2. Mr. Rivers placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Well now, seems like you've got the heart of a real farmer. Let's take a look." They walked through the pasture, stopping in front of a young brown Jersey cow. She was smaller than the Holstein, but known for richer milk. "She'll be a good one," Mr. Rivers said. "Strong, steady, and gives great milk. But she'll need patience." Jake smiled. "I've learned a thing or two about patience." He purchased the cow with money earned from weeks of early mornings and long days. Every dollar used to buy her was a dollar he had worked for hand by hand, jar by jar. As he loaded the new cow onto the trailer, Jake felt something shift inside him again. Not fear, not anxiety, but growth. Growth doesn't always feel like a big celebration. Sometimes it feels like a quiet, steady responsibility settling onto your shoulders and becoming part of who you are. Jake drove home slowly, thinking of how far he'd come. One cow, one decision, one brave step, and now another, Mike's internal battle. Meanwhile, Mike's days were becoming heavier, not because of the physical labor, but because of something far more painful: comparison. Each time he saw Jake driving through town with jars of milk, customers greeting him warmly, or children waving, he felt something twist deep inside him. Regret, envy, self-doubt. He didn't hate Jake. He hated the version of himself that had been too afraid to try. One evening, as Jake arrived home with the second cow, Mike happened to be walking by. He froze when he saw the trailer and the beautiful brown cow stepping onto the farm. Jake waved happily. "Hey, Mike! Look, we're expanding!" Mike forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's... wow. Another cow?" "Yep. Jake replied proudly. Business is growing. Mike nodded slowly. That's good, man. Good for you. But inside a storm raged. That could have been me. We could have done this together. Why didn't I just try? Fear had stopped him once. Now regret was stopping him even more. He walked away quietly, but Jake could sense something was wrong. He watched his friend's hunched shoulders fade into the dusk and felt an ache in his heart. He whispered to himself, I wish he believed in himself the way I believe in him. But growth is a personal journey. No one can take the step for you. Double the work, double the reward. Having 2 cows changed everything for Jake. It wasn't just more milk, it was more responsibility, more cleaning, more feeding, more care, more planning. He woke up even earlier, went to bed even later, and every muscle in his body felt the pressure of the added workload. The barn was busier, the milk jars multiplied. Jake bought new equipment to handle the extra production. Some nights he sat on the barn floor too exhausted to move. But then he would look at the 2 cows standing calmly, chewing hay, alive and thriving, and he would feel the strength return. This is what building something feels like, he would whisper to himself. Tough, but worth it, and it truly was. With 2 cows, Jake's production doubled. His customer reach expanded. People from nearby towns began asking for his milk. Businesses inquired about supplying local restaurants. Jake had officially passed the stage of trying something new. He was becoming a real entrepreneur the moment that changed. Mike won. Late afternoon, while heading home, Mike overheard a conversation between 2 neighbors. Jake's milk is the best thing in town. I heard he's supplying a cafe now. Word is he's buying a 3rd cow soon. The words hit Mike like a punch to the chest. A 3rd cow? Already? He walked home slowly, dragging his feet, thinking deeply. When he reached his small living room, he sat down, put his head in his hands, and let out a long breath. How did this happen? He whispered. How did Jake move ahead so far and I stayed still? And then, for the first time, he admitted the truth out loud. It wasn't the risk. It was my fear of the risk. He understood something painful yet powerful. He didn't fail because he tried and lost. He failed because he never tried at all. And that realization didn't break him. It woke him up. Suddenly the world felt different. The town seemed to move faster. The days seemed to slip by quicker. He could almost feel time passing and leaving him behind. Mike stood up, staring into the mirror. I can't stay like this, he said. I have to do something, anything. It wasn't confidence yet, not courage, not certainty, but it was the first spark of change he had felt in months. A new beginning, or too late. Meanwhile, Jake finished building a 2nd stall in the barn, a small but meaningful sign of growth. His wife helped him paint the doors, and together they laughed, talked, and dreamed of the future. Jake didn't know something important. His success was inspiring others. His courage was waking up someone who had been sleeping inside Mike for a long time. The question was, would Mike take the step? Would he act? Would he finally choose courage? Or had too much time already passed? The answer would come soon. In a way neither of them expected, because every story has a turning point, and theirs was just about to arrive. This ends segment 5. Ready for the next chapter? Segment 6. Crossroads of Courage, when one man rises and another must choose. Summer settled over Kansas like a warm blanket, long sunny days, buzzing fields, and skies so blue they felt endless. The town came alive with fairs, weekend markets, and families gathering outside to enjoy the weather. But inside two different homes, two very different realities were unfolding. Jake's barn was busier than ever, Mike's home felt quieter than ever, and the distance between the two friends, though physical only by a few roads, felt like miles apart in spirit. Jake's business expands every morning. Jake woke before dawn, stepping into a routine that had grown familiar yet demanding. Milk the cows, clean the stalls, prepare fresh feed, load the jars, deliver to customers, restock supplies, track sales, plan for the next day, a rhythm of labor, a rhythm of growth. With the second cow, his production had doubled. With increased demand, he needed more jars, more feed, more time, and more skill. It wasn't easy, but Jake no longer expected easy. He expected progress, and progress is always earned, never given. Customers praised his dedication. Local cafes began using his milk for lattes at pastries. A small grocery store asked if he could supply them weekly. Jake had gone from unemployed day laborer to trusted local milk supplier to rising entrepreneur. His name was becoming known not because he was lucky, but because he was consistent. Consistency is the quiet power behind every success story. It builds a business. It builds a reputation. It builds a future, and Jake was living proof of that. Mike and the endless someday. Meanwhile, Mike stood at another construction site, holding a shovel, staring at the ground as if expecting answers to rise from the dirt. His body was tired, his spirit even more so. He worked hard, no one could deny that, but his life hadn't changed at all. The same small paycheck, the same worries, the same quiet frustration brewing inside him every time he walked past Jake's barn. He often found himself thinking, maybe I'm just not meant for more. Maybe people like me aren't supposed to take risks. Maybe, someday, when life gets easier, I'll try again. But someday never arrives for those who wait for perfect conditions. Change doesn't come when things get easier. Things get easier only after you change. And slowly, painfully, Mike was beginning to understand that. A conversation with a stranger. One afternoon after work, Mike stopped by a small cafe for a drink. As he sat by the window, he overheard two customers talking at a nearby table. "I bought milk from Jake this morning," a woman said. "Best milk I've tasted. That guy's building something amazing." Her friend nodded. "Heard he's getting more cows soon. Hard-working guy. A real dreamer." Mike froze. A real dreamer. Hard-working. Building something. Each word felt like a tiny needle pressing into him. He sipped his drink slowly, staring out the window, the hum of the conversation fading as his own thoughts grew louder. "Oh, people admire him. They respect him. They talk about him. When was the last time someone talked about me like that?" He didn't say it with bitterness, but with sadness. A sadness that comes when a person realizes they have been living small because of fear. The talk that changed everything. Later that week, Mike gathered the courage to visit Jake again. He found him working in the barn, fixing a wooden railing. Jake looked up with a smile. Mike, come on in. Mike stepped slowly into the barn, looking around at the two cows, the clean stalls, the equipment, the jars stacked neatly. This place looks amazing, Mike said. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead. It's getting there, one day at a time. Mike leaned against a post, hesitating. Jake, can I ask you something? Anything, Jake replied. Mike swallowed hard. When you started this, weren't you scared? Jake paused. Of course I was. I was terrified. Then how did you do it? Mike asked, voice cracking slightly. Jake smiled gently. I was more scared of staying the same than I was of trying and failing. Those words hit Mike like a wave. I was more scared of staying the same. The sentence repeated in his mind, echoing through every corner of regret he had built inside himself. Jake continued, Mike, fear doesn't disappear. You just learn to walk with it. You learn to move anyway. Mike's eyes filled with moisture he tried to hide. Jake stepped closer. You could still start something, you know. Mike shook his head. I think I'm too late. Jake laughed softly. Too late, Mike? You're younger today than you'll ever be again. The only time it's too late is when you're gone from this earth. Mike didn't reply. He just stood there feeling an ache he didn't know how to describe, an ache to change, an ache to begin, an ache to finally step into the life he had been watching from the outside. Jake's hidden struggle. That night, long after Mike left, Jake sat alone in the barn. The cows slept peacefully. The moonlight cast soft shadows across the wooden floor. And in the silence, Jake allowed himself to feel something he hadn't admitted to anyone. He was tired. He was overwhelmed. He was scared too. He whispered into the quiet, What if I can't keep up? What if I'm taking on too much? What if this gets too big? But then he looked at the two cows, then at the rows of jars, then at the ledger of customers, then at the work he'd built with his own two hands, and he reminded himself, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing the work anyway. He exhaled slowly. Tomorrow, I'll keep going. And he did, every day, without fail, Mike's night of realization. Later that same night, Mike lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling like a man facing himself for the first time. He whispered into the darkness, If Jake can do it, now, why can't I? What am I really afraid of? What am I losing by not trying? Then the most important question of all. What is fear costing me? He thought about the life he wanted, a stable income, more freedom, respect, a future he could be proud of. And suddenly, something shifted, a small trembling spark, but real. Mike sat up in bed. I can't stay like this. I can't live behind someone else's courage. I have to take a chance, at least once. And for the first time, Mike fell asleep, not with fear, but with intention. And intention is the first quiet sign that a person is finally ready to rise. This ends segment 6. Ready for the final powerful ending? Segment 7. The harvest of courage. Two futures, one lesson. Autumn arrived in Kansas with golden fields, crisp air, and a quiet beauty that made the whole town feel like it was preparing for something new. Leaves turned orange. The mornings grew cooler. And in the midst of this seasonal transformation, two men stood at different points of change. Jake, stronger, wiser, and busier than ever, was preparing for his biggest expansion yet. Mike, tired of regret, tired of fear, and tired of watching life pass him by, was preparing to finally take a step. Their journeys, once parallel, now pointed toward a powerful ending. Jake's new beginning. Jake's farm had grown into something much bigger than he ever dreamed. 2 cows had become the foundation of a business that now demanded real structure, real planning, and real decisions. He built a bigger barn, bought better equipment, added refrigeration for storage, and began the paperwork to register his dairy brand officially. Customers now came from neighboring towns. Local cafes promoted his milk proudly, and the grocery store placed a steady order every week. What began as a desperate attempt to escape day labor life had turned into a path toward real prosperity. One crisp morning, Jake stood in the middle of his barn, the sunlight filtering through wooden beams, dust dancing in the light. He whispered to himself, This is what risk can create." He didn't take the journey because he was fearless. He took it because he believed more in growth than in fear. And now he was living the harvest of that belief. Mike's step into the unknown. Meanwhile, in a small house across town, Mike sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a pen in his hand. His wife watched him quietly, sensing the heaviness in the air. Finally, he spoke. "I'm ready," he said softly. "For what?" she asked, though she already knew. "To start something, to take a risk, to try again." His wife looked at him with a mix of relief and emotion. For months she had watched him struggle with regret. Now, for the first time, she saw hope in his eyes. "What are you thinking of doing?" she asked gently. Mike exhaled. "I don't know exactly, but I know I'm done being scared of starting." She placed her hand over his. "Whatever you choose, I'm with you." Those words gave Mike the confidence he'd been missing for so long. He didn't rush, he didn't jump blindly, he simply decided to begin. And beginnings are always the hardest part. The day their paths crossed. Again, one afternoon, Jake was finishing up chores when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, and there stood Mike, but this time his friend looked different. There was no slump in his shoulders, no heaviness in his eyes, no cloud of fear hovering over him. Jake smiled warmly. "Hey, Mike, good to see you." Mike stepped closer, nervous but determined. "I came to tell you something," he said. "Go on," Jake replied. Mike swallowed. "I'm starting my own thing, not cows. Something else. I don't know where it'll lead. I don't know if it'll work. But Unston, I'm going to try." Jake's eyes softened with pride. "That's all you need, Mike, the courage to try." Mike nodded. "I wasted a lot of time being scared." Jake shook his head gently. "No time is wasted if it teaches you something and you learned. That's what matters." The two men stood there quietly, letting the moment settle. Then Mike looked around Jake's farm and said with a half smile, "You really built something here." Jake replied, "And now you'll build something too." It wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't a celebration. It was simply the moment a man chooses to change. And those moments shape destinies. They're different journeys. In the months that followed, Jake's dairy business continued to grow steadily. He hired his first helper, then his second. He purchased his third cow, then his fourth. By the next spring, he was supplying 3 cafes, 2 grocery stores, and a small restaurant. He wasn't rich overnight, but he was rising. Brick by brick, step by step, choice by choice. Meanwhile, Mike began his own path. He started a small handyman service, fixing fences, repairing sheds, cleaning yards, and helping families with odd jobs around town. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't huge, but it was his. And for the first time in his life, he felt the thrill of creating something on his own. He made mistakes, he learned, he improved, he grew. 1 job turned into 2, 2 turned into 5. 5 turned into a steady weekly income. Mike wasn't becoming a millionaire, but he was becoming something more important, someone who believed in himself. A final meeting. Under the Kansas sky one. Warm evening the next summer, Jake and Mike met at the edge of town near an open field. The sky was glowing orange. The wind moved gently through the tall grass. Jake leaned on a fence post. "So, how's business?" Mike smiled proudly. "Growing, slowly, but growing." Jake nodded. "That's how every great thing begins." Mike looked at the horizon. "You know, Jake, I used to think fear was the enemy, but it turns out inaction was the real enemy." Jake smiled. "That's the truth most people never learn." Mike chuckled softly. "If I had listened to my fear, I'd still be standing in the same place, watching life move past me." "And now?" Jake asked. "Now," Mike said, "I'm moving with it." The two friends stood there as the sun lowered behind the fields. Different journeys, different outcomes, but the same lesson learned in their own ways. The lesson for everyone listening. Whether you're in Kansas or anywhere else in the world, this story carries a truth that applies universally. Fear is normal, doubt is normal, risk is uncomfortable, but staying stuck is far more dangerous than trying and failing. Jake took a risk early. He worked hard, he grew, his life changed. Mike hesitated, he watched, he regretted. But then, he finally took his step, and his life changed too. Not everyone will become rich, not everyone will succeed immediately, but everyone has the choice to begin. The story reminds us: 1. No risk, no gain. Nothing grows in comfort zones. 2. Action beats intention every time. Dreams don't work unless you do. 3. Fear only controls you if you let it. Courage is a muscle, you build it by using it. 4. Your journey is your own. Start where you are, with what you have. 5. The first step is the hardest, but it's also the one that changes everything. Some people rise early, some rise later, but those who rise eventually, those who choose courage at any point in life, they build futures worth living. Jake built a dairy farm. Mike built a service business. You will build something too, as soon as you decide to take your first brave step. Because in the end, Success belongs to those who try.